Ukraine's armed forces have been forced onto the back foot for large parts of the war. They've had to dig in and defend their ground against intense and ruthless Russian aggression, withstanding daily drone swarms and fending off wave after wave of assaults. However, slowly but surely, the tide has started to turn, and now Ukraine has had enough of playing defense. It's ready to go on the offensive, and it has a massive missile arsenal just waiting to be unleashed. Fabian Hoffman, defense expert and missile systems specialist, as well as doctoral research fellow at the Oslo Nuclear Project, conducted a comprehensive analysis of Ukraine's missile program evolution over the past decade on his specialized blog Missile Matters. Hoffman detailed the country's accelerated growth and remarkable ambitions in this crucial sector of modern warfare. Like other post-Soviet nations, Ukraine maintains strong dependence on Russia for missile components and commercial exchange after the Soviet Union's collapse. This situation changed dramatically in 2014 when Russia forcibly annexed the Crimean Peninsula, irreparably breaking relations between the two countries. From that moment on, Russia became Ukraine's main adversary, an aggressive occupying force that took a significant portion of its territory. Kyiv could no longer rely on Moscow as before, needing to implement substantial changes in its missile industry. The country still possessed some Soviet-era design and production facilities, operated by companies like Uzhoy and UTMATCH, later renamed to ATACMS, as well as the Luch Design Bureau, specialized in long-range missile systems. Ukraine maintained various missile development programs in progress, working intensively to implement systems like the 300mm Vilka guided rocket put into service in 2018, and the R-360 Neptune anti-ship cruise missile operational in 2021. The country even initiated negotiations with Indonesia about a possible export agreement for the Neptune in 2021, while continuing to develop a separate short-range ballistic missile program, known by the code name HIM-2, which faced repeated funding and timeline problems. In summary, by early 2022, Ukraine had managed to make the most of its post-Soviet missile facilities, knowledge, and resources, completing some apparently successful domestic programs and establishing a small but growing missile industry of its own. However, it did not possess the massive missile arsenal of Russia, nor the same extensive storage facilities, multiple production plants, or the colossal military budget of its navy. When the conflict began in early 2022, Ukraine could not effectively counter the Russian missile 005. Furthermore, the Kremlin appears to have intentionally attacked missile industry sites throughout Ukraine to disrupt production and delay Kyiv's development of new weapons. It used its own missiles to target the Pivdon-Mash production plant in the city of Dnipro in late 2022. For example, reports also emerged in the initial stages of the war about Russian attacks on infrastructure related to Kyiv's HIM-2 program, such as the Pavlorod chemical plant, a solid fuel production site in the Dnipro-Torusk region. This facility was struck in May 2023 and again in late 2023 and May 2024. These attacks, combined with the fact that Ukraine suddenly found itself having to defend its border regions and repel a gigantic invading force, meant that missile programs suffered serious setbacks. Ukraine faced a dilemma. It needed to focus on its priorities, which mainly revolved around preventing Russia from gaining too much ground and establishing itself to stabilize key positions along the front lines. At the same time, it could not simply abandon its missile development projects. It needed weapons it could use to counterattack the invaders. Although the specific decisions made behind the scenes are not clear, it is likely that Kyiv decided to streamline its HIM-2 program, with the goal of putting an operational missile into production as quickly as possible. Ukraine also utilized its existing missile stocks in the best way possible, most notably firing R-360 Neptune anti-ship missiles against Russia's famous flagship Moskva, which sank in April 2022. Meanwhile, Kyiv's engineers were working hard, developing a way to modify the Neptune to strike land-based targets, in addition to maritime ones, according to Hoffman. This likely involved inserting a jamming-resistant GPS receiver into the missiles, potentially, along with a terminal guidance system to help the missile find its way to targets and strike with precision. Fortunately, things began to change for the better in 2023. First, Ukraine obtained long-range strike capabilities in May, when it received shipments of Storm Shadow and SCALP-EG missiles from the United Kingdom and France. It is believed that the UK sent up to 300 of these missiles in several batches, with France supplying another 50. Each of these missiles is valued between $1 and $2.5 million, and with a range of over 250 kilometers. They are capable of causing serious damage, even to fortified or reinforced targets. Ukraine also received ATACMS from the US and reportedly fired them for the first time in late 2023 to destroy 9 helicopters at Russian bases in occupied areas of Ukraine, also killing dozens of Russian troops. However, Ukraine learned some important lessons about missiles in 2023. First, it learned how effective they could be. The early Storm Shadow strikes were incredibly effective. And Kijun knew that if it could build up its missile stocks, it could continue with similar strikes in the future. Second, Ukraine learned that although it had many generous and supportive allies around the world, particularly in the NATO alliance, it could not necessarily rely on them to deliver missiles in the large and consistent quantities needed to truly counterattack Russia with the desired regularity. Third, Ukraine's armed forces learned that even if they received missiles from their Western allies, they would often come with restrictions. The US, for example, initially prohibited Ukraine from using attack missiles and attacks on the Russians. And similar limitations were imposed on Storm Shadow usage as well. Ukraine reached a clear and obvious conclusion. It had to work on its own domestic programs. If it wanted missiles, it could produce in large numbers and use when and how it wanted without limitations or restrictions getting in the way. By the summer of 2023, the country had successfully modified its anti-ship Neptune missiles to strike land-based targets and used one to eliminate a Russian S-400 missile system radar at Cape Sarkankut in Crimea. Ukraine's engineers also dedicated themselves to expanding the limits of the Neptune missile, even further establishing plans for a completely new variant called Long Neptune, which would have a much greater range than any other missile in the country's arsenal. Zelenskyy announced via Telegram that Ukraine's new long-range Neptune had already been deployed on the battlefield with a range of 1,000 kilometers. The missile measures approximately 6 meters without including the booster, being thicker than the original with a maximum width of about 50 centimeters. This ballistic missile has a warhead weighing more than 480 kilograms with an operational range of about 300 kilometers, although some experts say it could go further, perhaps up to 500 kilometers. It can reach extraordinary speeds of over 5,000 kilometers per hour. Developed by Firepoint Company, this long-range cruise missile can carry a 1,150 kilogram warhead and fly up to 3,000 kilometers into Russia. The company plans to produce up to 200 units per month. Between the Flamingo, the Long Neptune, and the Sapsan, Ukraine has more than enough firepower, all domestically manufactured, to certainly protect its sovereignty and much more. In the coming days, weeks, and months, it can rely on these mega missiles to cause unprecedented damage to Russian targets, harming the enemy-s war effort and causing chaos so vast that not even Putin-s propaganda will be enough to cover it up. This may very well be the long-awaited turning point for Ukraine. It is time for Kijun to unleash its full force. At last.